So remember again that you can pause it to give everybody a chance to kind of fill this in, because some of this information is review and some of it is a little bit new to think about. This journal entry is called Many Genes and the Environment. So at the end of last week we learned about polygenic traits, where different parts of your DNA make proteins that create a trait. And skin color is one, height is one, shoe size is one, weight is one. And so when we talk about skin color, we want to remember it is a polygenic trait. Many genes code for proteins to make the skin color. But if you look at this picture, it shows all these tan lines. And so it reminds us that more than just the genes influence certain traits. So let's first talk about the genes. Your DNA comes in small sections called genes that code for proteins. Sorry, I need to switch back to blue. Genes. And you're born with these. Where do you get them? You get them from your mom and your dad. And this is why we're able to do those Punnett squares. For a trait like skin color, being exposed to what in the environment? Something in the environment, the sun, is actually going to make your skin darker. This is because the environment can affect how genes are turned on or turned off. So the sun is actually activating or turning some of these genes on. You already have them, but you just might not have them turned on. And so for someone who gets darker in the sun, they have the genes, they're just not all turned on at that moment. They're waiting for the sun to be turned on. So the question for you to think about is, can you list any traits that are influenced only by the environment? So we've talked about a few, like for example, if you are in France, you might say bonjour. You might say hola if you are in a country that speaks Spanish. So the language that you speak is a trait. It's influenced all by your environment. Are there any other things that you can think of that are determined all by your environment? After this, we are going to our notes for a little bit. I believe that we're on page 62. Regardless, we are finishing up with notes about what's called nature-nurture. So your genes are your DNA, and that is your nature. That is what you are born with. So nature is your heredity. This is what you are born with. Your nurture is your environment. And one way to think of this is like a nurturing mom, a mom who gives you a hug and says, I love you, and makes you breakfast in the morning, versus maybe some days your mom isn't in a good mood. And so your nurture is your environment, what you're around. So the debate is, which has a greater influence? Are your genes more important, or is your environment more important? A good example of this is in the book Harry Potter. I actually wrote a paper on this when I was in college about how Harry Potter grew up in a cupboard under the stairs. What an awful environment. But he didn't turn out as weird as some of the other people, or as mean as some of the other people. And so was it his genes that made him who he was, or was it being locked under the cupboard? And most scientists will actually say it's somewhere in the middle. It's a combination of nature and nurture. One way to study it is to use identical twins, because identical twins have the same DNA. They'll actually usually do this on adopted twins. Those are the best ones to research, right? So if you find out later that you had a brother or sister and that you were identical twins, you might have been raised apart, but it turns out they have even some weird things in common, like they were both firefighters, or they both have an orange sofa. And is that chance, or is that statistically relevant? That's what we're trying to study. So for example, a couple of important ones. Your diet. This is an environmental factor. Your diet can stop the progression of PKU if you have that genetic disease, right? So if we circle PKU, that's a gene disease. It can also limit your risk for other genetic predispositions. So if you were doing your research yesterday and maybe you got to the third part, the part about like colon cancer. So we know that certain cancers you can be genetically predisposed to, but you might not get it if you eat healthy. The last one is environmental toxins. So for example, if we look at lung cancer or skin cancer, we know that things in the environment can actually change how our genes are expressed. So what we're doing from here, after we have all of these notes, is we're going to read a little article about the nature-nurture debate. And this article is from Stanford University. And it's on a section called Ask a Geneticist. Someone wrote in, I believe that I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. So we're going to read this article, and this article is on page 3M in your handbooks. So once you get your handbook, once you turn to page 3M, we want to do kind of what hopefully you did yesterday, which is have the class read out. And I'll leave the ATPs for Miss Woodall so that she can kind of use the ATP to help reward you if you want. And hopefully you can kind of read out loud and talk about where does your genes come into play? And where does the environment come into play? And this gives some really good examples. And then you have 5 questions to answer at the end. After about 30 minutes, we should be done reading and answering. And then we'll go to the computer lab to finish up working on our research about genetic disorders. So that's what you have for Thursday.